Hey, Hoopheads, long time no see. Sorry, brief family emergency got in the way of last week's show, but there wasn't going to be a lot to get into anyway. So thankfully, we didn't miss a whole lot in the NBA. Being in the post-transactional era of the season, it's very, very easy to just kind of stick to the W's, stick to the injuries, and keep you updated that way. So didn't miss a whole lot, but I will go ahead and compress this into 2 weeks. Don't know if we'll keep doing that moving forward, as this is pretty much going to be where we're at for the next 2 months in basketball anyway. But we'll just let the games kind of dictate how much we need to talk about them as we go. For now, we got to get you caught up on the news. So thank you again. Please like, subscribe, share, post about this on various forums. Facebook is a really good one. If you still have Facebook, just do it. I don't care. Just do it. Put it on there. Let's see what they say. I need to do it. I don't use Facebook, but like if you do, just do it. That's the corporate stuff for the week. So let's get to the business. Okay, we're going to do injuries real quick, and then we're just going to go into the tiers for the rest of the episode. Of course, probably about 30 minutes here. So Douglas, if you're on your run, just sorry about it. It's going to be a short one today. You're going to have to put on Bill Simmons or some other lesser podcast after this. All right. Injuries. Most important, let's talk about Scottie Barnes, Benedict Mathurin, and Ben Simmons. Two of those, I don't even need to tell you about the third one much. I think any NBA fan pretty much has an understanding of what we're going to have to get into that can of worms. But let's start with Scottie. Scottie had a hand fracture. They went ahead and did surgery for him, shut that down. Mavericks fans will have probably seen the Benedict Mathurin injury. He ran his shoulder into, I can't remember which Maverick, and is pretty much done for. They went ahead and had surgery on that. So you got no Mathurin. Also, we'll get into what that means in the tiers for this, but right now that's just letting you know 2 young guys shut down. I don't know how many guys in total have been shut down. You have Trey, potentially, Joel, potentially. And so, we've had a little bit of this. It's been a fairly nice year for injuries overall, at least the big injuries. But it does suck to have these two guys out. For the Raptors, it's a little less severe because of where they're at. For the Pacers, this is certainly a very big blow to them, but we'll talk about why there's some positives that can come out of this on their side too. Again, I still have to talk about this team later in the podcast, so we'll save most of it and we'll stick to just the player here. Ben Simmons is now shut down for the 3rd straight season to some extent, either prior to the season starting or as the season's going. These back issues, now we have people that are completely just either believe it's on the Greg Oden side of life where it's just done, where there's no hope for him to ever come back. We have people taking odds on whether he's going to get cut by the Nets in the offseason. So there's a lot of interesting conversation to have about Ben Simmons' future. I think there's some stuff we have to be careful about when we talk about how much people want to play, especially with the back issue. Degenerative backs have destroyed many careers in basketball and sports in general, hell, in life in general. But it's probably easier to pick on Ben Simmons because of the optics for which this played out. Dwight Howard kind of got the same crap because Laker fans were so cruel during that poor year, that one, the first free agent year that he signed there or was traded there. And it wasn't his fault. I mean, essentially, we saw it throughout the latter half of his career where he still played basically a decade and eventually helped that Laker team win a championship, funny enough. But the back injuries changed who Dwight Howard was. He went from being one of the greatest players potentially of all time, most dominant at least, to being, a high-level starter, low-level starter, high-level bench player, and out of the league. And that's kind of the best case scenario in these stories. Obviously, Greg Oden had more issues than just his back. I believe that was all knee issues as well. Foot issues too. I think there was a lot of issues there for him. So Ben's already had a better career than he would have had. Obviously, Ben's been very fortunate. He showed us a lot of potential. He's been one of the best defenders in basketball. I would have been one of the many people that told the Houston Rockets to trade for Ben Simmons and packages for Harden, because I thought at the time Ben Simmons would have been a real piece to build around. I think that what he could do for your team is essentially a defensive stopping Magic Johnson. Just never came to be. Has not come to be. The signs are all there. The potential's all there. It's just, here we are 3 seasons in a row down, and it's, the shooting stuff doesn't even matter because he can't even get on the court. This is a pretty tough one. I would definitely say I have lots of hope for his future. Again, I certainly hope that this is his body failing him and this isn't the case of the player. But I know that the difference of an opinion is going to be very loud on this until we have definite answers. And even if we have definite answers, I'm sure people are still going to sit to their side of the story or their preferred version of the story. But either way, just some tough news there for Ben Simmons. And I'm not going to be one of those people who shits on him any further because, again, the body part of this whole thing is the crapshoot. You know what I mean? There's so many Greg Oden is literally the only player I need to name. There's so many others, Bill Walton obviously is probably one of the bigger ones as well, but you don't get promised a healthy body for the whole duration of your career. And like I said, until you can prove to me that Ben Simmons is playing hooky for money, I just don't want to hear that other side of the story. And our thoughts are with Ben and for the future of his career. And again, we'll talk about the Nets going into the bottom of this rundown. So not going to go any further on that. We do have 3. I forgot to write one down, but it's okay because this isn't a bad injury, but it is a relevant one. So 2 likely to return injury guys, but severe injuries nonetheless. Russell Westbrook had a hand fracture. Obviously, this we'll talk about more for the Clippers once we get to the tiers, but for the rest, this is a little concerning. Obviously, the shooting has been an issue for a while, consistency at least with the shooting. But he's been a really good energy player for that team. I think that he's still got a lot of positive he can bring to a basketball team. And honestly, I would prefer to see him be a Clipper for the rest of his career. I think it's just awesome for him, for the city of LA. I think that it just is a perfect marriage for everybody involved. And I guess as a little impartial person, I'm a big Westbrook guy myself. I do want to see him just have a happy ending of his career. It doesn't have to be all this, it doesn't have to be title chasing. It doesn't have to be super beautiful, all in the world, all world player again. He'll get those accolades in the Hall of Fame. For me, I just want to see his legacy sort of pan out a little bit more. What he does for the LA community means a lot. I think that stuff will eventually overshadow all of the other bull crap that's got into the Russell Westbrook story over the last 4 or 5 years. I guess about 7 years now. We've been having these conversations about Russ since he won the MVP. He will likely return before the end of the season. That's great news for the Clippers because they're going to be, sort of already relying on guys that they maybe should have traded. We'll get into. So I think having Russ back is going to matter quite a bit for this team. For the playoffs, who knows? But especially for now, last year it was incredible for them in the playoffs. So we will see. And the bigger injury, Karl Anthony Towns has a torn meniscus. So I kind of buried the lead there. I think I have a torn meniscus. And when I heard that, I've heard a lot of people talk about having torn meniscus and they still play basketball. Of course, a lot of other people don't play for aren't high-level players on making maximum salary contracts on playoff contending or title contending teams either. So wasn't super surprised to hear that they have a timetable for him to return either in the playoffs or right before. Because again, when you see the meniscus, it's kind of we're at a point where modern science sort of laughs at these a little bit. Like they're obviously devastating. He's going to be out for at least 2 months, which is a very, very impactful thing for the team. But for him to have a tear in his knee essentially, and then still have the potential to return by the playoffs is an important thing. Of course, it'll matter when it comes to the future of this thing. how healthy and gelled will this group be when they get to the playoffs? That's where it gets a little dicier. And then our final injury, I did not write down, so I think it was just an ankle sprain, but Steph Curry did get an ankle sprain that was pretty bad. He's had the history of them, blah, blah, blah. Either way, they already have the report. It's not a big deal. He is going to miss some time. We will talk about what that means to the Warriors down in the rundown. But for right now, don't worry. Steph Curry will not be missing significant time, and this isn't some sort of injury that will also have lingering effects throughout his career necessarily. Of course, he does have the history of this stuff, so it's possible that as he ages, it starts to flare up again, I guess. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, not a doctor, but it's potential for aging, So that's where we're at for the injuries there. Let's get into the tiers, guys, because there's plenty of fun and interesting little tidbits about where we are in the season. And, of course, we got to start with our guys trying to compete for the title the hardest, in my opinion, the contenders, the teams that I know I feel confident about who they are, what they're trying to do, and that they can get close enough to accomplishing it or accomplish it, obviously. And that's two teams still. I'm still sticking by just two teams right now. The Boston Celtics and the Denver Nuggets. They're both rolling for the most part. The Celtics should have already clinched the Eastern first seed soon, should be. There's still some troubling signs of closing late games. I think that has to do with a few things. I think that there's always been a bit of that struggle with Tatum and with Brown. I think there's always been a bit of a struggle with that in the sort of offense that they run with the three heavy offense. I think there's also still some gelling that needs to happen with all the new pieces, or with the two bigger new pieces with Porzingis and Holiday. So yes, I part of me still looks at the Miami Heat, the Milwaukee Bucks, whoever else could get interesting in the playoffs, and see them sneaking up on a Celtics team that's not prepared to close games. It hasn't quite figured out their alchemy. That does worry me, but otherwise, I don't think there's too much you could be. That's pretty much nitpicking to me. I mean, last night, there was they barely beat the Suns yesterday, and then Tatum was like, "I'm glad to have great players on my team because they did everything. I was awful." I go to look at the box score, and this man is if that is an average or awful, then I think Tatum's closer to the MVP conversations than some people might actually want to consider. Either way, they're on pace. And, of course, the Nuggets, man. I would probably tier rank the Nuggets as the best team in basketball right now. I know, big hot take there, but it's just they're back. They're healthy. They're playing some of their best basketball of the season. I still have some questions about the depth down the roster, but, at this point, I do feel pretty confident, especially with getting into the Karl Anthony Towns injury, that they have a good chance of taking the Western Conference first seed. Obviously, there's going to be some stiff competition we're about to get to, but right now I think everything about the Nuggets makes me feel like it's a confident, it's a tight-knit, it's a fun watching experience for the fans in the West this year. I'm happy for it, but it all feels like it's just to be for second place. And we will see how true that is moving forward. Contenders If. This one, I think, is pretty easy here. You're going to have some of the teams here. I've kind of lumped these tiers into tiers themselves. These are the three teams doing the best record-wise. Of course, they all three have different stories a little bit. You have Oklahoma City, who I think, you couldn't be doing any better right now. I still have plenty of questions about what their team is. The Josh Giddey, the Gordon Hayward of it, the lack of big man depth. Some of those things matter, I think, more than maybe the regular season is going to show. But, I mean, they're really in a great position for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to walk away with the MVP this season. I mean, his numbers are doing a lot of the talking, obviously. But other than the Nuggets, with this news about the Timberwolves, they are really in prime position to take the 1 seed. Voting fatigue might either backfire or continue to help the anti-Jokic argument. Because of last year, it seemed like it was pretty obvious that there was some voting fatigue. And Joel was also amazing, but it felt like there was a little tinge of that. And for this year, it feels like it could be a little bit more of that. We will see, though, because maybe it could reverse the other side. It's like, well, look at he's doing still. Maybe we should have given the MVP. And then Nikola gets it again. Because it certainly doesn't look like the other contenders for MVP have done enough. Tatum, obviously, there's such a good core around him. And, the competition is so stiff. I just think he gets written out of it pretty quickly there, unfortunately, by his fault or not. And then I think Luka I just don't trust where the Mavs are. And we'll get into that, obviously. But that's still a big part of the issue. The Wolves, they're in an interesting spot. They will probably slip quite a bit, but not like severely, not like Philadelphia has necessarily. I think that they're probably going to be a 4 or 5 seed at the worst. I think the Clippers could still pass them. I think the Nuggets will pass them. I'm not sure how much further they could go, because then I start to get a little skeptical about the rest of the Western Conference and where that'll finish out. But I mean, even the Pelicans playing the best basketball they're playing right now, I think they could certainly make a run at this too. So you're still a really good team. You still have a lot of great defensive pieces. Naz Reid was incredible for them a couple nights ago. Even in a game they lost in overtime, and after a back-to-back in the game the game before, we have Anthony Edwards smacking his head on the rim when Gabe-saving block. So there's plenty of talent there. I think my biggest issue was in that back-to-back loss to the Cavs. Yes, the Cavs. In the back-to-back game, they won the one, they lost the second. In that loss, they had a moment where Rudy Gobert was ejected. Yeah, I think he got 2 techs in the game, and he was ejected. Essentially, he was doing the money sign to the referees. Now, look, I've gotten on this podcast. I've complained about the referees. I certainly understand. I'm not mad at Gobert for complaining about the referees. I think for the moment, though, that really shows me that I don't know that I can trust Rudy Gobert as a maturity guy. And I think that we've talked a lot about his issues on the offensive side, some of the limitations defensively, despite being such a good defender. But I really think we've brushed over a little bit how this plays into him on the court. I mean, Anthony Edwards is a great player, but he's a young super talent that's got to sort of manage it all right now. He's still learning on the fly. There's a lot of young kids on that roster with him growing. Towns isn't on the court. Regardless of how you feel like he impacts that, he's just not on the court, so it doesn't matter right now. You need Rudy to be the leader. You need Rudy to, Mike Conley, obviously that's a big part of his job, but you need Rudy Gobert to show that too. And for him to get caught up in the muck of that is really disappointing for the mission that you think the Wolves are on. And I think that's why I still respect them as Contenders If, but I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of this season they're looking more like a mid team or more like a danger zone team, because the immaturity of the team is hurting them more than the injury. But we'll see. I mean, this is also a great spot for them to establish who they are without Towns and continue to prove that they're contenders. So we will see how that goes either way. And a similar situation actually to that is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Their resilience throughout this whole season has been impressive, but this little Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley-less stretch has been really handled well. I mean, I know you're looking at 5-5 in the last 10, but I think that ultimately this has been a pretty good stretch and a pretty good showing for the Cavs to prove that, hey, we've got enough talent, we've got enough ability, we were really good, we're well coached, we're well played. Like we care about this group. This isn't some failed project that's about to explode. This is a real beginning to something. Maybe not dynasty, maybe not even a title, but to a real era of Cavaliers basketball where they're going to try to contend as a playoff contender and then eventually take it further after that. I still think they're a little stuck in that playoff contender mode right now, but the talent is there. The resilience is there. I think they've passed a lot of the tests that matter more to me than the simple eye test thing, the Mitchell thing that I've talked about, Mitchell and Garland together in the backcourt, which still does matter, still is important to watch in the playoffs, but ultimately I think can be tampered down a little bit, understanding where they are and understanding what they've accomplished. Again, it's the regular season. This could all come up to flames in the postseason, but I think since Jared Allen had such a bad playoff series last year, and he's been such an improvement as far as this whole season, I think that's what lends me to believing more in them this year than last, or that there is a repeat coming. The next tier in our Contenders If is going to be the rest of everybody else. And this does feel like it is a significant drop down to me a little bit, just a little bit. But I still have these teams in the Contenders If. I still am aware of the upside that these teams could provide. The New York Knicks, look, the Knicks and the Sixers are still in survival mode. The Knicks are at least a little bit closer to being healthy. I think within the next 2 weeks, OG and Anunoby should be back. That's a big deal, obviously. Who knows what that'll look like offensively, but defensively that helps a lot. And then that allows them to play their version of basketball and maybe allows OG to develop back into a rhythm on his own pace. The other team, the Sixers, are not doing as well. They might even be a week away from being demoted altogether. I don't think that I think I'm going to stick with them as long as I can until I'm convinced for sure that Joel Embiid isn't coming back. I think I'm going to still ride with this team here because I do like the group. I do think they could be really fun if Joel gets back and can get back into the rhythm he was playing with. But that's a big if. That's a big if right now. And I would be more inclined to believe that they're going to fade into the bottom of into the pack. I mean, they're already the 7th seed as it is. They can't go past the 10th seed. I don't think it's even going to be possible. We'll get into that when we get into who's in the 10th seed in the East. But I do think that the Sixers, I don't know if they're delaying the inevitable with this Joel Embiid information. I don't know. But it's a tough situation because this was a group that had Joel looking like a better version of himself than even his MVP form last season, and then this group right here that has a lot of great development, a lot of good pieces around it, had gotten some good pieces around it in the salvaging of the James Harden deal, but it just doesn't seem like it's going to be enough. Injuries. That's what we talk about, the injuries. It's a pain in the ass. Imagine if they still had Ben Simmons and Joel this year. Clippers. That is probably the most disrespectful team in this group. I'm sure most Clipper fans would be pretty agitated with me. They'd be like, I don't even have any Lakers shit behind me right now, but they'd probably be a Laker fan. I find this difficult to believe this team. It's the lack of ability at the 5 to scare me, to feel like you're a real presence in a Western Conference that is so goddamn deep at the big man position. You have, this Russell Westbrook injury that certainly opens the door to Bones Highland getting back in. How does that go? So far, it's been fine. How does it go long term? PJ Tucker, obviously, that's going to be a bigger story as they go. He could be a big salvaging piece. It's very confusing as to whether he matters, whether he doesn't matter. And it kind of feels like the franchise as a whole, while they're very interested in winning a title, obviously there's 3 all-world players. There's 4 first ballot Hall of Famers on the team. It just feels like some of this is about having more of a selling point going into the Inglewood experience next season than it is about winning a playoff series. And I thought maybe this deadline kind of showed us that, where it felt obvious that they had to make another move to really, really put this over the top. And they just didn't. And it makes me wonder if they're complacent enough to believe that the 3 guys /4 / the rest of their high value role players is enough. And I just don't see it this year. I don't see that being the case. I think could they be in a position where they're the team that loses to the Nuggets in the Western Conference Finals? Absolutely. And maybe there's still a win there for them long term in doing that. It just feels like when you're talking about the title, I see so many holes in this Clippers team that even a great Kawhi Leonard, even a resurgent James Harden doesn't give me confidence. It does not give me the confidence. And then the last team, talking about confidence, the Mavericks. I mean, we were so excited about this team coming out of the trade deadline. Loved everything they did. Didn't really care about the cost as much because, and I broke it down, there's a lot of reasons why that was a little overblown. But then it turned bad after the All-Star break. It turned real sour. like worst defensive record in the league kind of stuff. I said managing the bigs would be a hassle and be a hurdle for Jason Kidd. I've been very, very right. He struggles to, in my opinion, find the right rotation all the time. And I think that's not just because he's inept or incompetent alone. He could be. I think that it's a very difficult task, like I've broken down, where you have all three guys, Kleba, Lively, and Gafford, that are all useful NBA players. But they all sort of have their fits. They all have their good and their bad right now, especially Lively. He's a rookie. I mean, eventually the idea is that Lively plays as much as he physically can. But it's still mentally, he's still got to get there. Physically, he's still got to get there. So this, the Gafford and the leaning on Gafford, leaning on Kleba more isn't that worrisome to me. It's just finding the right alchemy seems to be a problem. Also, the Dante Exum, Tim Hardaway Jr. Minutes. Those are difficult to manage as well, because I think Tim Hardaway Jr. can come out on any given night and start being and be a very big X factor. At the same time, I don't think he's a guy who deserves to have all of the room in the world to just shoot when he's having a bad night. And Exum sort of fills in a lot of the issues that they have as a combined unit when he's on the court, even if he isn't that same offensive weapon. So again, using these guys is interesting. Looks like it's gotten a little better. They had the Heat come in. That was an important game. One that I think the Heat played a little closer to the way the Mavericks would want to play, and they were able to do enough to win that one. And then, of course, you just beat the Pistons, where it's good. You didn't lose the Pistons. So you can't read too much on that. The Luka defensive numbers are super alarming, I think, at this point. I think part of me wonders if he's LeBroning, method that, we saw LeBron do to get David Blatt fired at one point, to get his roster traded at another point in Cleveland, where it's just like, look, I can put up 30 a night, but I'm probably going to give up 30 a night too. So until you get this thing looking like I want it to, that's just the way this is going to go. So how long are we going to do this? Or the other argument is he's just kind of a little lazy. I mean, he's just had a new kid. All-Star break is supposed to be a break. So maybe Luka just came out a little lazier, and as a result, the Mavericks defense or depending on how you look at it, because in basketball, the defensive stats going this way means that you're going that way. Either way, danger zone. I'm already at 30 minutes. So there you go, Doug. I'm gonna help you through the whole thing, I think. Suns, Bucks, Heat. They all theoretically, logically should not be in the danger zone anymore. But I told you, danger zone is a tough one to get out of. Once you're in the danger zone, it's tough to get out of it. You got to really prove to me you got to get out of it. Suns, they can't stay healthy, and their depth is still kind of laughable, even with Royce O'Neal fitting like a charm. The Bucks, Doc Dame and Pat Bev, man, that's the holy trinity of me not trusting this situation. And no disrespect to the future Hall of Famer Dame Lillard. It's a tough time in his life. He's been honest about that. This is going to be a tough season, and I do think that ultimately some of this stuff is just too much to fix, and that maybe Dame Giannis year 2 will have more of what we've been expecting from year 1. That's my hunch. The Miami Heat are losing some tough games. Not really what I was hoping for. I think if they would have won these last 2 against the Mavericks and the Thunder, I would have gone ahead and lifted them from the danger zone, because I respect the threat of the zombie Heat. I respect the reality that they will come back from the dead and destroy any team in their path once the playoffs start. But I do think that this way of playing basketball in the regular season is a fine line between success and disappointment, because you're giving yourself such little margin for error. The belief in yourself is great. The culture is great. I get it. But the walking the fine line is why these next 2 teams I'm going to bring up don't inspire confidence in me, despite the players that should inspire confidence in me. Because when you're okay with this version of playing, I think you're just doing too much to hurt yourself in the time that you need to be the best. You're having to do too much. And I think part of that might have come into play against the Nuggets, where the Nuggets were probably always going to win that series last year for the title. But at least the Heat would have gotten closer had they not had to literally, take one of the hardest paths to that title series. So that's why I still say if the Heat want to play this game, they're in the 6th spot right now. I think that they can stay above the play-in moving forward, which is enough in some people's minds. But for me, it's still a little disappointing. And I respect the Miami Heat, but that's just a danger zone thing to do. And so there is no favorites here. If you act like you're going to be in the danger zone, you're in the danger zone. If you don't believe me, look at my next 2 teams. Why would I not be ready to sell you on the Lakers and Warriors revival? Well, mostly because these two have been fighting for the 9th and 10th seed for like a month now. And if they were truly revived, then one of them would have probably made some sort of push, right? But mostly it's I don't trust the upside. I think that these 2 teams have done well to rebuild around their stars and to give them a shot to play well this season. But I think the culmination of maybe even the last couple of years of team building are starting to wear both of these groups down in some ways. For the Lakers, I think it's a little different. I think D'Angelo Russell is playing amazing basketball, setting himself up to potentially stay with the Lakers for the foreseeable future, right? Amazing story for him. Obviously, will he live up to a future contract, blah, blah, blah. We'll get into that one if it's irrelevant. Great for him. Still, defensively, they have to take him out of big situations. It's fine. I actually think it's one of the best attributes of D'Angelo Russell is that he's so calm and willing and a team first kind of guy in that scenario, because that's where a lot of NBA players struggle. He literally did it the other night. I mean, he hit the game winning shot essentially, and then let Spencer Dinwiddie come in and play defense on Dame for the final possession of that basketball game. So that says a lot. At the same time, this team is going to get healthier and they're kind of deep. But then the issue with this team is Jared Vanderbilt, an amazing defensive player, can't shoot. You have D'Angelo Russell, amazing offensive player, can't play defense. Austin Reeves, great floor facilitator, great gamer, defensively not there, right? He's decent. He's a nice little menace, off-ball menace is if you're going off 2K tags. But otherwise, he's just there's so much evidence of Austin Reeves. Anthony's playing amazing basketball this season, still can't shoot a basketball worth to save his life. I mean, it's this jump shot he had for the 22 season. And it was the 22 season, not just the bubble. 22 season is just gone. It just isn't there. It hasn't been there for a couple of years now. And then LeBron. I mean, LeBron is still very, very good, but how much can he do deadlifting? What all does this look like when it's together? You get Gabe Vincent, that adds a little more. You get Spencer Dinwiddie, he adds something else. It's not a perfect player. It's not even a player I can guarantee you plays in the playoff series, but it's something else. Cam Reddish, it's a similar situation. It's a nice size player. It's a good position player at that size. Who knows what you get on a given night? Taurean Prince, same thing. So it's nice that you have optionality. It's nice that it's deep to some extent, deeper than it has been in multiple seasons in LA. But I just don't. I see so many flaws and so many potential ways that Darvin Ham can misuse this roster, something that he's done quite a bit this season. And it ended up costing them. And then with the Warriors, they've been through a complete hellish season. I mean, you have the Draymond Green chaos, you have the young guys forcing their way out, and then you have an assistant coach pass away during a team event. It does not get much more frustrating than that. Now you have a Steph Curry injury that comes at one of the worst times in the season. In my opinion, will end up locking the Warriors into the 10th seed. Another good reason why the Lakers ought to get the fuck out of the 9th seed, right? Like anybody in the 9th seed does not want to see this Warriors team again. Even if they're not something special for the playoffs for a title run, I'm not trying to deal with that in a one-game play-in. I don't care what the history's shown me. I don't care how good, the Lakers against the Warriors has been recently. I don't care. I don't want to deal with that. Um, so it's I think for both of these two teams, it's fun to watch the legacies of Steph Curry and LeBron James continue to be written. But I think it's fair to say there's a lot of concern. There's a lot of concern moving forward with these two teams this season and what this actually could look like. Could either one of these teams win the title? I guess. But it feels like that's really pulling straws a little bit, at least based off the evidence we have. All right, our final danger zone, Chicago Bulls and the Brooklyn Nets. They're closer to mid than they're not. I know that. Well, not even the Nets, but they're stuck in the danger zone. Like I said, once you're in the danger zone, you're in the danger zone. Hillbilly. That's a biker. Same kind of hillbilly, different kind of hillbilly. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Bulls have been impressively resilient. I would definitely say that there's a theme of a lot of teams that have dealt with some crazy adversity and not bowed out the way that they traditionally have in the past. But at the same time, we kind of know what the Bulls are. We kind of know that they're shorthanded anyway because your two starting guards just aren't playing basketball anymore. But hey, Kobe White's played amazing. Dosunmu has been amazing. Phillips has been nice to see come out. Like it's been nice to see the growth on this roster. It feels like DeMar DeRozan's about to lock in a lifetime contract with the Bulls to keep them this level of mid. And we've talked about how we don't love that. And that front office is kind of fucked up for that. But we're going to take and put that to the side. And we're just going to appreciate what this team is this season and say, hey, a lot of times this season, I thought you guys could quit, force your way out. And you guys are sticking to it. They're almost at 500 again. And honestly, probably could still get above 500 with the way their schedule plays out. And who knows, maybe even have a better seeding into the playoffs with other issues from some of these teams ahead of them. Namely the Pacers and the Sixers, right? So I'm just saying, don't write them off. However, the Nets are you should go ahead and forget about the Nets this year. They would be better off next year if they were any normal team. But of course, we've been over it. The Ben Simmons of it all, the Kyrie and KD fallout, we're still watching. Kyrie, KD, and James Harden fallout. We should not forget Harden in all this. It's tough. Mikal Bridges is playing awful comparatively from last season, certainly. They had to fire their coach. That is the guy I really like, but I think they had to fire because they were that desperate. Good luck, Nets fans. I'll put it this way. The Nets are now the team in 2K I would most want to use and remodel because they're just that fucking blank canvas at this point. Anyway, we're going to move on from the Nets because the offseason will be where they shine again, or they'll have to shine, hopefully. We'll get into the mid. This first one is going to take a while. The rest are probably going to be pretty quick, especially the better next year teams. The Magic, the Pelicans, and the Kings, put them all together in the mid. There's plenty of fans, I'm sure, would be pissed off with all three of these teams, but I'm standing my ground. Your teams are mid. It's okay to be mid because, especially with these three teams, you still have good futures. The Orlando Magic scored 74 points in a basketball game in 2024. That makes my entire point on why I don't trust their offense, even though I love their talent and I respect how good of a defensive team they are this season already. So I know that they could get in and maybe even win a series. Are they competing for a title? Orlando Magic fans, be honest, they're not. They're mid. That's fine. That's very good. They're above average, if anything. Great. Next year, what are we doing to make it better? Same thing with New Orleans. Pelicans are peaking right now. Actually, they're statistically one of the best teams in basketball on all sides of no matter how you break down the measurements, literally playing the best basketball they've played in New Orleans in a very long time. So don't want to understate that at all. At the same time, I still have to think about this in the grand scheme of what are they competing for? This is about the title. I'm ranking these teams on how do they compete for the title. And I just don't have any way to say this other than you have three offensive focused stars and one lockdown defender to save it all. You have a good group, not a great group around them. And nobody's got real experience here except for CJ and Jonas Valanciunas. And they're both, no offense, but essentially, bridesmaids a lot of times. So not even bridesmaids. They're like the fourth bridesmaid. They're not even the maid of honor. You know what I mean? They're like the one all the way down. They've been to the playoffs. They've had some success, but it's comparatively on the other side. They're the last groom. They're the last bridesmaid. So that's just my skepticism. But otherwise, I love what's happening in New Orleans. I think it's got an awesome future. I think they should be taking a massive leap next season from start of the season to finish. I just am still weary about what the first dip into the playoffs will look like for this group. And the reason why, the Sacramento Kings. Sometimes these things can look amazing. We get super excited about revitalizing bad franchises. I do, especially. The Kings can't fool me. This is grade A mid. They didn't do anything to figure out their defensive issues. They can still score a bunch of points. They still have the fastest point guard in the game. At the same time, they didn't get better defensively. So, yes, it's awesome. You're the 6th seed right now. I think you can still maintain that, depending on how you finish the season. Obviously, I think they can still maintain it. I just don't know, especially who's the 3rd seed. You get minutes. You're going to get potentially the Denver Nuggets. It would be, at least right now, you would get the Timberwolves potentially. You get the Clippers potentially. There's just a lot of matchups there where the Kings are just, they're going to come in the underdogs this time, which is good. I think that makes them feel better because they were the underdogs last year. They just weren't the underdogs, unfortunately. So it makes it a little bit more palatable to take those losses. It's more of a pride win when you are the underdog and you throw some good punches rather than get upset, even though it was, the seeding last year with them and the Warriors. We all knew the Warriors were going to win that series most likely. And the Kings did well. So I don't think that they couldn't steal one of those series. I just talked about the Clippers and how I don't trust their bigs. I could see them taking that, but ultimately the Kings they're going to have to go into the offseason and say, we need to be better. If we want this to capitalize on this moment, we have to acknowledge that one of our best players has a serious flaw, and it's not a big deal, but we have to remedy that if we're going to maximize this roster. So getting someone to help with the rim protection has to be top of the line priority in the offseason. Getting into the last 2 mid teams, the Pacers, you are who I thought you were. Losing the energy of Benedict Mathurin will certainly hurt, but minutes are going to go out to other guys that we want to see, and I think that's good for them long term. I do feel like now we can sort of reassess the Pacers season and say, hey, you're probably just trying to play in the playoffs. Like, you're probably trying to get out of the play-in and get beat by somebody, because Mathurin was a big energy piece for a team that needs a lot of things defensively. So I don't like taking him away, even though he's still sort of learning on that aspect of the court. It just feels like this is one of those points where, okay, they're struggling before this injury, and I think they're going to continue to struggle as the season progresses. Probably are stuck in the play-in. They're the 8th seed right now. I think they're probably stuck in that 7 to 10 slot. So ultimately, I think that at this point, you're just getting it together. You're starting to try to find something defensively, because this team has just been so bad defensively. You have to find something consistent to get this track meet style of basketball fixed. And again, throw some punches in the playoffs, reassess some of your pieces in the offseason. You have a lot of moves to still make, even though you spend quite a bit on Siakam. You still have enough pieces to make other moves, shore up your roster in other positions, and then come at it just like the Kings. And then my final team in mid is a promotion. I'm promoting people this late in the season, but I have to respect the Hawks, because they're probably the most interesting team in basketball for a team so irrelevant to this season. Now, I know they could go and upset somebody, and even if they don't go far, they could still screw someone else up, and then now they've changed and become one of the more relevant parts of the season. But I have 3 things that really make me interested. 3 questions about the Hawks that make me interested. I want to follow as the season finishes. Can DeJounte Murray actually boost this franchise from Trae Young? We've talked about it already. The world's talking about it a little bit. Is there a possibility of him pulling Atlanta into a very successful finish this season and then allowing them to trade Trae Young? My second question, does this actually turn into a path where now the franchise thinks they can keep both? Maybe it could work. Maybe we just do this, and this. We have too much of this. Now let's do this, and this. And then now these two guys can play together. And then my final part, and this is the most important question, at what point do they consider their draft position knowing that they pretty much can't get out of the 10th seed? Like, you can't go lower. And it's everything 11 through 15 in the East is done. It's done. There's no one that's going to be as bad as those teams this season. It just isn't going to happen. So I assume you don't care if you're the Hawks because you can't do anything about it anyway. So you just go ahead, you hope for the best, and you hope this team maybe throws some punches and has some fun this year, because ultimately that could end up being a better omen for the future anyway. All right, and then our better luck next year teams. Like I said, this ain't going to be very long. I'm going to bury a couple teams real quick here, though. Houston Rockets, Utah Jazz, I mentioned 2 weeks ago. Very likely these guys were going to go into the next category, and then 2 weeks later, they gave me nothing but good reason for that. Again, Houston has a lot of awesome players. I'm very interested in their future. Maybe there's even some hope for Jalen Green yet, but they're playing for next year. The Utah Jazz, who actually were fairly good and competitive in the Western Conference for a bit, as the Warriors were the ones falling back, have basically swapped positions, where the Warriors are now firmly in their spot and the Jazz now seem to be firmly in their old spot, where they just clearly aren't good enough. They're an interesting group. They play their ass off. They've got a lot of young players that are very interesting for the future, but ultimately just find themselves a day late and a dollar short in a lot of games. Memphis, Toronto, Charlotte. Again, all of these teams remain very frisky, but there's no miracles coming. I kind of teased the Hornets potentially making a run at the Western Conference 10th or the Eastern Conference 10th seed. It was never going to happen, but it pretty much got squished out pretty quickly. Like, it was a nice start, but then the losses started piling up again. And, that's the nature of the business. But I will say, while I can't tell you to go watch the Raptors and the Grizzlies, they're not playing bad basketball. So there's reasons. I will say the one thing about these three teams, Brandon Miller. Go watch Brandon Miller play basketball. I know the Hornets don't get a lot of love. I know that there's so much good basketball. I care about these bad teams. Go watch Brandon Miller. It's impressive. I know we're going to talk about Wemby literally in a second a lot, but man, Brandon Miller, that's a good player right there. Next group of guys here. We get our three guys who have been pretty much the worst teams in basketball. Of course, there's one person missing, and they're special, so they got their own little tier, not just because I couldn't fit it on this, but because they deserved it. Two things can be true at once. The Blazers and the Pistons, they remain bad. They remain bad. They're not winning a ton of games. The Spurs are better. The Spurs have really been better. They've been far more competitive this season, over the last couple of weeks than this season entirely. But now we're starting to see limiting Wemby again. We're starting to see the Spurs be like, yeah, you know what? We're gonna pull the reins back a little bit. You've had a good season. You're rookie of the year. Let's chill out a little bit. So I've got three things, one for each team to watch. Scoot Henderson, DeAndre Ayton. We've talked about the Ayton piece in Portland a little bit. Those two guys' chemistry as the season goes, I think that'll tell a lot about what the projection is for Portland, not only in the immediate future, but in the actual distant future. Cade Cunningham, man, he's really one of the best young players in basketball. I know the Pistons suck, and most people don't understand that. They see some of his shooting numbers, they see some of the things, and they're like, is this guy really good? Trust me, he's really good. And that's not just because he's a DFW kid, but it's kind of because he's a DFW kid. And then finally, of course, Victor Wembanyama will still be playing basketball. Go watch that. It's always an experience. But when he's not, even if he is, watch those teams to start to see who's fitting and falling in line. And I think that this is going to be more obvious now than ever, because these guys will probably already internally have a better feeling for who the team wants to keep, who the team might move on from in the offseason as they start to build around Wemby. Knowing and seeing what it is on the court is much easier to build around than the idea of Wemby and the idea of this. So our final team, the Washington Wizards. Kyle Kuzma, you tweeted the tweet you shouldn't have tweeted, and now here we are. they're coming for the worst record, and it's kind of poetic. So obviously, if you've been following the season, the Pistons set a record for the most consecutive losses with 28. The Zards came very close to coming back into that streak. I think theirs got to 17, 18. Maybe it wasn't that bad, but it was pretty bad. But they did just win yesterday against the Hornets, maybe Friday. My days run together, especially on the weekend. Just got their first win in a while. That was important. Or would they be the Nets or the Hornets? See, now I'm just gonna have to go look because that is gonna bother me. But either way, it's fun to talk about because here we are, thinking Detroit's about to do this 28 game losing streak thing and take the world by storm, right? And it's the worst franchise team ever. And then in the same season, the Wizards are like, hold on, we're gonna do it our way. We're gonna do it our version. That 28 straight thing, that's played out. And it was the Hornets and it was on Friday. That's played out. We're going to do it our special way where you kind of believe in us a little bit more, but not really. And then eventually we're just going to bottom out real hard. Real hard go. As soon as the deadline's over, we're going to bottom out. So, yeah, I'm impressed. Of course, like I said, they're not going to compete for the losing streak record, but the fact that they're tied right now with the Pistons for the worst record in basketball, and now we're all going to sort of watch that not only for draft position or for lottery odds, but for the hilarity of the Pistons being that bad. Kyle Kuzma tweeting what he tweeted, and then the Zards eventually surpassing them in worst record. That'd be chef's kiss, and really not a bad way to cap up this fun season. It's been a very interesting 2023-24 season. I think that covering it like this has given me new perspective, but I've also just really appreciated this season. The NBA is in an incredible place. Even if we're walking towards another Denver Nuggets title, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, I still am really excited and really pumped about what this thing is going to look like in the future. And I think that Denver might need to get theirs in while they can, because it's going to start getting a lot harder to win titles in this new NBA for sure. That's another week of the Hoopla. Like, subscribe, fucking post to Facebook, fucking post to Tumblr if you're on Tumblr, fucking post to Whisper if you use Whisper. Is Whisper still a thing? TikTok, I don't know how you would post this to TikTok. I should post this to TikTok. You do that too if you want to. Either way, thank you for helping. You're a big part of it just by sitting here and listening to me babble every week. It does a lot for us, keeps the energy going. Pay attention to Pass the Rock. We're about to do big things. If you have any sort of sports content that you're interested in getting out there, please come out to us, slide into any various DMs that we might have on social media. We'd be happy to help you be a part of the team. Right now we're kind of building this thing from scratch, but we have a lot of interesting creative minds and creative desires to see this thing usher in a new era of sports journalism to some extent. This is more sports pontificating than journalism, but at the end of the day, we think we can deliver great content for people. We think that we have a passion for it, and keep a lookout for what we're doing. C's is going to launch a wrestling part of this division. I'm hoping Patrick ends up going with the NHL thing down the road whenever that's ready, and we'll start kind of splitting this thing off. And hey, wherever you're at, John Locke, you better watch your ass. Lock on, watch your ass, pal. Rock's coming.